Hey guys, so today we're going to talk about what blood pressure is, along with the difference between arteries, arterioles, capillaries, veins and venules. So to start with, we need to talk about blood pressure. So you may have heard of the term blood pressure before, and you've probably heard of it with a bad connotation attached to it. So for example, you might have heard of a relative who has bad blood pressure, okay, or somebody who's on blood pressure medication, and they're often people that have heart issues. So what is blood pressure? So blood pressure is the force of the blood against the artery walls. Now that occurs basically when the heart contracts and when the heart relaxes. So we have spoken before about the blood coming into the heart. It fills a certain chamber and then the heart contracts against it. The pressure of that then overcomes one of the valves to go either into the next chamber of the heart or to go into an artery, okay, to take the blood away from the heart. So when we record blood pressure, so you may have had this done to yourself, or maybe you've seen somebody at the doctor have this done to them. They put that blood pressure cuff on, and then they'll put a stethoscope on the inside of your elbow and listen to certain beats, essentially. Now, this measures the systolic and the diastolic pressure, okay, within your system. So systolic pressure is the pressure that is measured when the chambers of the heart contract, okay, and that's when they're full of blood. So there's a lot of pressure there. So you imagine if you've got essentially a full balloon or a balloon full of air or a balloon full of water or whatever, and you press on the outside of that, okay, or even if the balloon's full of sand, pressing on the outside, it's a lot of pressure. And then when the heart relaxes, it also measures the pressure of the heart when it's relaxed. So that's when the heart chamber is empty, okay. So when the heart chamber's empty, and there's not much really going on, the blood's already gushed out. So the systolic pressure is when the heart contracts, there's a lot of pressure, there's a lot of blood flowing at once, there's a lot of pressure against the artery walls. Remember, an artery takes the blood away from the heart, okay? Diastolic pressure is when the heart is relaxed and there's not as much blood flowing through that artery at that stage. Okay, so you might have heard of a normal blood pressure being, say, 120 over 80. So the systolic pressure is 120 and the diastolic pressure is 80. So as we mentioned, because the systolic pressure is when the heart contracts and it's full of blood and lots of blood is gushing, that pressure is higher than when the heart is relaxed, so hence the 120 over 80. If your diastolic pressure gets over usually about 92, in a chronic condition, chronic means long-term, so if it's in a long-term basis, if it's over 92, then usually that's called for things like blood pressure medication. Okay, we also need to know the difference between the pulmonary circulation and the systemic circulation, okay? And this is where we're really going to talk about arteries, arterioles, capillaries, veins, venules, those sorts of things. So I have mentioned in a previous video that pulmonary means lungs, okay? So the pulmonary circulation is right here, okay? You can see an outline here of a set of lungs, and if you look over here, it's telling you that pulmonary circulation is essentially here. So that's any circulation that takes blood to or away from the lungs. Simple. Systemic circulation takes blood to or away from the system, as in the body systems. So basically everything apart from the lungs is your systemic circulation. That's really important to note. In a diagram like this, the big lines on the outside, they are representing things like arteries if it's going away from the heart, or veins if it's coming back up to the heart. And then when you've got these little messes of arteries and veins in here, they are actually things like arterioles, venules and capillaries. So they're small, much smaller blood vessels. And I'll show you another little picture on the next slide. So here we are. If we were to take cross sections of arteries, arterioles, and capillaries, and vice versa over here, veins, venules, and capillaries. You can see the difference. Lots more layers in an artery. Now usually that's because that needs to withstand a lot more pressure, okay, so it needs to be a lot stronger. And then as we get down into and it starts to branch off. So these are the big main ones, and then it will start to branch off and branch off. It's not like we've got one blood vessel coming from the heart and it goes to your arms and your legs and your feet and comes back. It's not one single vessel, okay? It branches off and branches off. It's like a tree. So the smaller the branches are, the thinner the walls they'll have, and the more diffusion that can occur. And we'll talk about that soon, okay? So here, these arteries and veins are more like transport vessels, okay? They're just transporting blood to and from. And then as we get smaller and smaller, like here, for example, in an arteriole, where you've just got the endothelium layer, oxygen can more easily get into and out of these vessels, and particularly at the capillary level. So they're really thin, and things like oxygen and nutrients and things like that can get into and out of these vessels here. Okay, so that allows for the diffusion of really vital things to get to our organs and our muscles. So again, simple picture of the same thing. So just showing the thickness of walls. So thicker the wall, it's an artery. As we get smaller, it's an arteriole, and as we get smaller again, it's a capillary. And same over here, the thick ones are the veins. Then as we get thinner, they're venules, and as we get thinner again, they're capillaries. Now diffusion is really important. So this here says capillaries permit the diffusion of oxygen and nutrients from the blood into the tissues, and diffusion of waste products, so like uric acid, for example, or urea, of the metabolism and carbon dioxide from the tissues into the blood. Okay, so over here, it's really important to note that things always move from an area of highest concentration to an area of lowest concentration. So if you've got lots of oxygen here outside a cell. So imagine those red bits are oxygen molecules, okay? And that this greeny orange, not greeny orange, greeny bluey yellowy colored thing is the cell, okay? Diffusion through this small membrane occurs because the oxygen wants to even itself out. At the moment, oxygen is in its highest concentration outside the cell, and it's in lower concentration inside the cell. So the oxygen wants to even itself out. It wants to go from highest concentration to lowest concentration. So over here, when diffusion occurs, now we have an even concentration of oxygen. It has evened itself out, and that's called diffusion. And again, diffusion can only happen through really, really thin membranes. So in those arterioles or capillaries, you've got the really, really thin membranes, and that means oxygen and carbon dioxide can move through it. So imagine if you had a brick, okay, oxygen and carbon dioxide is not going to move through that sort of a wall, a brick wall. Whereas if you have a wall made of tissue, a single layer of literally a tissue that you would blow your nose on, you can blow through that, okay? Oxygen can move into and out of that. So the thickness of the wall is really important. Haemoglobin is another really important thing to learn. So the way in which oxygen is transported around on those blood cells is through oxygen carrying haemoglobin molecules, okay? So you know by now that a blood cell is a concave disc. So if you were in the Google Goggles class, you'll know that we've got this disc here, and it's got that little, it's like a little, get my hand where I can see it, it's a bit cup shaped on the top or the bottom, depending on which way you look at it. And these little things here are oxygen molecules that have bonded with hemoglobin molecules. So here we've got hemoglobin, oxygen attaches to it kind of like a magnet, I suppose, and it carries oxygen along. If you have low hemoglobin levels, you have a low oxygen carrying capacity, okay? So hemoglobin is something that will increase in production if you're at altitude, So that therefore increases your oxygen carrying capacity. The more hemoglobin you have, the more capacity you have to carry oxygen without being fatigued. Okay, so that really influences your fatigue levels, because if you can carry more oxygen at once, you don't need to take in as much oxygen through breathing. Makes sense? Hopefully. So it's really important to understand those training effects. You now need to go and research the effects of training on the cardiovascular system. I want you to create a video outlining why exercise is beneficial to your cardiovascular health, okay? Also, please make sure you go back through this video, take all the notes you need, stop, rewind, replay as much as you need, and go and research further. Key points of this video were blood pressure, okay, the difference between arteries, veins, arterioles, venules, and capillaries. Diffusion, really important, how oxygen and carbon dioxide diffuse through membranes at the capillary level. And hemoglobin, how it carries oxygen. Make sure you go back, have a look at all that, and then onto your video. Thanks, guys.